And as we're waiting for people to join, we'll just go through a few housekeeping things. We will be having a robust question and answer time at the end of our session. And so we will definitely want you to get your questions out as soon as you have them. So there's a Q&A box here. Feel free to start asking the questions as soon as you have them. That way we have time to kind of curate a little bit and make sure that we consolidate some of the common questions so that as many of them that we can cover, we can cover. And otherwise, we're just going to get this PowerPoint up and get started. Thank you once again to my esteemed guests today from Boston. We're so excited that you're here to share a little bit about Boston itself and your institutions, and how to think about kind of the application process in these new times. And so why don't I have David go ahead and start us off?
Great, thank you, Gloria. And good morning from Massachusetts. Same time, good evening, good afternoon to you in India, the Middle East, in Northern Africa. Thank you again for tuning into this webinar, The Benefits of Boston and its Private Universities, part of the Tuesday Talk series that's brought to you by our friends at Initial View. My name is David Weber. I'm an Associate Director in the Office of Undergraduate Admission at Boston College. On behalf of my colleagues and co-presenters, Mr. Scott Dyer from Boston University.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you today.
Brendan Graham from Northeastern University.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
And Bridget Moore from Tufts University.
Hi.
We wish you and your family a very safe and healthy start of summer. While the traditional summer college search experiences like college fairs and trips to our universities to tour and to visit have, at least for the time being, been replaced by webinars like this and virtual content. We are so happy to have this opportunity to engage with this conversation with you this evening. I know I can speak on behalf of this panel that we hope sooner than later you'll be able to travel to the United States, visit our universities, and of course, we can't wait to be able to return to your regions and visit you at your schools. All of us on this panel do extensive international travel and outreach, building relationships at your schools and with your families, and it is one of the great pleasures of the work that we do. Our discussion today is not your typical university information session. By the session title, of course, you know that our 4 universities are located in Boston, Massachusetts, and yes, we'll definitely talk more about our individual schools, but we also want to spend more time speaking about Boston, focusing on Boston, and what makes Boston arguably the greatest college city in the world. With nearly 200,000 university students in our relatively small city, there really is nowhere else quite like it. And many students are enrolled in universities that carry international acclaim, and you know those names. And there are also a lot of students that are attending schools that you may not be familiar with. Boston can be an incredible home for any type of student and also for any type of person. You'll find throughout our discussion that each of our 4 schools provide incredible educational, intellectual, social experiences, but also each university is distinctly different, from the neighborhood we reside in to our traditions, from our academic structure to our institutional identity. In Boston, each university has its own feel, its own vibe, and its own culture. The beauty of your college search is that you are the one who gets to find and determine where your home will be for your 4 years of university study. And I hope that we can really spark that exploration for you this evening. Finally, we look forward to answering your questions and talking more about the holistic application review process. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and cancellation of standardized test dates throughout the world, several schools have been reshaping their admission policies, and in particular, their testing policies. So how do we plan to go about the application review? What do we value, and how can valuable opportunities like partnering with Initial View impact your application? We'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. The legendary American writer and storyteller Mark Twain once wrote that in New York, they ask you how much you are worth. In Philadelphia, who are your parents? In Boston, they ask, how much do you know? Because Boston is America's college town. And we're excited to tell you more about Boston right now. Scott?
So when you think about the history of the United States, it is a relatively brief one as a nation. The earliest roots of this country really started right here in the New England area, and more specifically in the region of Boston. In fact, the seeds of revolution were actually cultivated here with the earliest thoughts of wanting to separate from England. And so over time, over the last 400 years, today, Boston has certainly become a leader in many different industries, not just here in the United States, but throughout the world as well. It has very much been referred to as America's college town, as my colleague has referenced before. If we can skip to the next slide, Gloria. When you have so many different degree granting institutions in the United States, just over 4,000 actually, you will find that there's a very high concentration of institutes of higher learning right here in the greater Boston area. It really does make for a really unique experience during one's undergraduate or even graduate years. When we look at the region as a whole, you will find that there's a relatively sizable population of our students who are in fact international. And when you consider that the greater city of Boston itself is close to 700,000 residents or so, the greater metro area is just over, say, 2 million or so. When you have about 250,000 of people in the Boston area as university students, it really does make for a unique environment. And when you consider some of the other larger cities in the United States, such as New York City and Los Angeles, Boston is actually the third largest city that attracts international students to the US each and every year. So in total, you have just over 60,000 or so international students coming into the Boston area each and every year. With that, there are just many things that you can do in the greater Boston area. This city, and I love how we start with eating. That's just when you have so many different people from all over the world, it really can be and is represented in the food offerings that you will find not only on our individual campuses, which is a whole nother conversation, but within the larger city itself. We have very distinctive and historical neighborhoods throughout the Boston area, from Chinatown to the North End, which is one of the oldest neighborhoods, the Italian neighborhood in Boston, to large Indian and Brazilian and South and Central American communities. It's an incredibly rich and vibrant place in which to live. We have a number of museums as well. It is a real cultural center of the United States as well. BostonUSA.com is a great website to go, especially in the future if you're planning a trip here. You can really focus in on all the different attractions from the Museum of Fine Arts, our Museum of Science, the African American History Museum, Natural History Museums. Each of our relative institutions will have a variety of cultural and museum offerings as well. There's the Great New England Aquarium, a really popular destination for many tourists and locals who are here. Over 4 decades of history, over 1 million visitors each year, whale watching opportunities, as well as many interactive, hands-on experiences that you can experience as well. Getting back to the history, the Boston Common, it's really a central focus of life in the city. It is the oldest public park in the United States, located right in downtown Boston, but it actually does stretch throughout many different communities in the greater Boston area. So it really does link and bring people together by emphasizing the beauty of our natural surroundings. But much like many things, Boston is a city of firsts. It's the very first and oldest public park in the United States. We have the very first public library in the United States. The very first residentially installed telephone is right here. It's 1 block from my house right here in Somerville. So there's a really rich history to all things Boston. And you can walk through history through the Freedom Trail. It's about 5 kilometers in length. It actually connects 16 different nationally significant historical sites. It's a network of churches and meeting houses and parks and sites that really do tell the story of the American Revolution. So it's not something that any other location in the United States can really offer you during your schooling experience. And this can be done in as little as 2 hours, but most people will really spend an entire day or two really delving into the history of this region and this country. And that goes without saying, music and entertainment is something that is widespread throughout the country, throughout the Boston area, not only at our individual institutions with many different offerings that we provide, but throughout the city itself. Again, being one of the larger metropolitan hubs in the United States, we do attract, local, national, and international talent within our many venues that range from incredibly small, intimate spaces to tens of thousands of spectators in the audience. And then, of course, there's sports. You don't have to be a sports fan to live here successfully or peacefully. It certainly can help. With the many colleges that we have, you'll find that there's a really wonderful, healthy rivalry that we share amongst one another, whether it's in the world of hockey or basketball or what have you. But we also support 5 professional level sports. Many of those logos will be familiar to many of you, from the New England Patriots to for football, American football, to the Boston Bruins ice hockey, the Boston Red Sox for baseball, the Boston Celtics for basketball, and then the Boston Revolution, which is a professional soccer team here as well. Finally, one of the benefits that I would say that really helps bring everything together is our public transportation system, otherwise known as the T, which offers subway, bus, trolley, and boat services all throughout the greater Boston area and beyond. So life as a college student is greatly facilitated by the use of the T to get you in and around the city. It really is quite manageable. There's also a great bike share program that students can utilize to really explore and get to know the city as best as they can. So I hope, and we all welcome you to explore Boston in the future.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research opportunities available to students while they're studying here in Boston. All of our institutions have research opportunities for students, and Boston offers a lot of great benefits in the research area as well. Industries that really support research, especially in the city, are things like biotech and especially healthcare. So if you're at all interested in either of those areas, there's plenty of opportunities to get involved in different laboratories around the city, either in industry or also in medical schools at different universities throughout the city. Even if the university you're attending doesn't have a medical school, a lot of students that don't necessarily go to that university are doing research at those schools, hospitals, doing, different practical experiences as well. So lots of opportunities to get involved. Typically, students get these opportunities by meeting with faculty members, learning about their interest, and just asking where these opportunities are, and then they jump in and really get engaged with them. I'd also add that research opportunities aren't limited to just STEM fields, but Boston has, I would say, a special expertise in this area. But if you're not necessarily interested in STEM, there's also going to be opportunities for you to do research at all of our institutions outside of those areas. We can go on to the next slide, where I'm going to talk a little bit about some professional opportunities in Boston. So as I mentioned, there is biotech, there's education, but there's also a thriving finance, technology sectors in Boston as well. There's a great startup culture here in Cambridge. So there's a lot of opportunities for students to get involved and get professional experience. Students can typically do some programs through their university that allow them to work full-time professionally, whether that's an internship or co-op program. They can be paid for that work thanks to the student visa program that allows them to participate in something called curriculum practical training. Essentially allows you to work while you're pursuing your degree, and then optional practical training allows you to work after your degree. If you're in a STEM designated field, you can check with the college or university when you're applying. If your major is STEM designated, then you can get a 2-year extension as well. So all of our institutions have robust opportunities to connect students with professional experiences, and Boston is really a great place to support that opportunity for you as well. We're going to move on now to talk a little bit about each of our institutions, and I'm going to hand it off to David first to tell you a little bit more about Boston College.
Great, thanks, Brendan. So Boston College, let me first just say that Boston College is a university. Boston College is what I would consider a medium-sized university with just over 9,000 undergraduate students, but also about 5,000 additional students that are doing master's programs, PhD programs, and other doctoral programs across a variety of disciplines. So the greater community is about 14,000 or so. Being a university, we are routed in a couple different things. We are routed in the study of liberal arts. We were founded with the base of liberal arts study. And every student at Boston College, no matter what their major will be, will work through a university core curriculum that explores complex problems and enduring questions throughout many of the traditional liberal arts subjects. We're also a university that has been built and established upon a specific tradition, and that would be the Catholic Jesuit tradition, one of 27 Jesuit institutions in the United States, where we speak a lot about improving human condition through service, through education, and through social justice. So when you're coming to Boston College, know that there is really a rich history of not only educational opportunities, but also looking at how we can best serve the needs of the world. Boston College is a university that's made up of 4 undergraduate divisions: arts and sciences, management, education, and nursing. When you apply to Boston College, you apply specifically into a division, and most students find their home in arts and sciences. But management, education, and nursing are what we would consider our pre-professional schools, steering you towards a particular industry. But with that said, students cross over, carry double majors across different divisions, pick up minors across different divisions. So there's actually a lot of flexibility that exists amongst the Boston College academic structure. Boston College is also a Research One university, as are the other schools on this panel, where the maximum amount of resources and the research level that exists on our campus is at the highest level, categorized as a Carnegie One Research University. The last thing I want to mention is community. Boston College is residential. Students live on campus. Students engage in a variety of clubs and organizations, from cultural organizations to service organizations, from varsity Division I athletics to incredible programs within the arts. Part of being a Boston College student is not only engaging with your life on campus and learning from those around you, but also engaging with Boston and finding opportunities to volunteer and serve within the communities of Boston as well. And while it's not required of you, it's something that most students at Boston College will do. They'll engage on campus and they'll engage in the city as well. We'll talk about Boston University next. And Scott, if you want to take over from here.
Great, thank you so much, David. Yes, so Boston University, we are a large private, and this is all subjective, I understand. We are a large private liberal arts and research institution. And by large, we have approximately just over 15,000 of our students are pursuing their undergraduate degree. We then have an additional 12,000 or so students who are pursuing a graduate level degree program. And as you can see, students are coming from all throughout the United States each and every year, as well as well over 100 different nationalities represented within our student body each year as well. With over, with thousands of universities in the United States, we are the 10th largest host of international students in the US. So, and this is something that we pride ourselves on, and it's not something that we've just been doing for the last 20 or 30 years. Actually, starting back in the mid 1800s is when we actually first started receiving international students from across the world, as well as sending our own students out into the world as part of their education and through our study abroad program, which is one of the nation's oldest and largest programs of its kind. Of the approximately 3,000 or so new undergraduate students starting with us each year, 24% of them are in fact international. And by international, we actually will specifically indicate that as students who do not hold or possess US citizenship or permanent residency status. So in addition to that 24%, there will actually be hundreds and hundreds of US citizens who have perhaps lived outside the United States their entire lives. So they very much do become a part of our international community as well. We are a proud member of the AAU, which is the Association of American Universities. This is an association of just over 65 member institutions who really do represent the leading research institutions in North America. The only other Boston area schools that join us in this association are Harvard, MIT, and Brandeis. And so why is this important to you? Research is very much a common thread amongst all of our students, whether you are here to study chemistry, engineering, whether you are within our School of Education, our psychology program, what have you. But research opportunities and funding are, they abound for our students. And we actually have just over $1 million US available each year that even in your very first year, you can apply for funding to help fund and receive grants to conduct your studies here. Fortunately, we are able to guarantee housing as well for all 4 years that you'll actually see here. So being that we are an urban institution, it's relatively rare to be able to guarantee housing for all 4 years that you're here. But while you are here with us, and about 11,000 of our 16 or so 15,000 undergraduates do live on our campus, those students are able to benefit from that liberal arts curriculum that many of our institutions share. So even though we are a research institution, it is within a liberal arts focus. So you can explore and take classes from throughout our entire academic community. And even though we are 15,000 plus students, we really do focus upon in-class instruction. So, having an average class size of under 30 students is incredibly important. About 80% of all of our classes have less than 30 students within them, and taught by faculty from the tops of their fields from throughout the world. So it is a really tremendous and phenomenal place to be, really feeling as though we're in the heart of the offerings that the great city of Boston has. And that's it for BU.
Thanks. So Northeastern University, if you're not familiar with us, we're a larger private research university with an emphasis on experiential learning and global opportunities for students. So we are situated pretty close to the heart of downtown Boston. We have a traditional college campus that's connected to the city as well. So it's a great place for students to call home during their 4 years of study here. And we also have guaranteed housing for students for all 4 years and require students to live on campus for the first 2 years, just as a great way to kind of integrate into that community and get familiar with all the different opportunities available to students there. And you can jump ahead to the next slide, Gloria. I want to talk a little bit about the academic opportunities at Northeastern. So as a larger institution, we have the benefit of being able to offer a really broad range of academic disciplines for students to choose from. And then within those offerings, there's a ton of flexibility available to students. So we have a huge range of majors. Students can also double major or minor. If you're not as familiar with the US system, a major is really just a dense concentration of courses in one particular subject area. At Northeastern, we also have something called a combined major program, which essentially allows you to study two different subjects in a more interdisciplinary way than you might if you were looking at them as a major and minor pair or just a double major set. So our faculty really communicate with each other to show students where those overlap and intersect. You can jump ahead to the next one as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the experiential learning piece at Northeastern. As I said, this is something that we really emphasize. We want to give students the chance to take the things that they're doing in the classroom out into the world. We do this through some things that have been mentioned today already, through study abroad experiences, research, service. I want to really emphasize Northeastern's co-op program. So if you're not familiar with it, co-op is essentially a chance for students to work during their undergraduate program for a period of 6 months, doing something that's directly related to their area of study. So they work in an entry-level position. A lot of times these are 9-to-5 type jobs. They're often paid for the work they're doing, and they really get direct experience in the ability to see whether or not their expectations match the reality of a particular career, a particular type of office. And then they get to put all that experience on their resume and use that feedback as they kind of plan their next steps and work forward, both with their studies and their professional track. Students can do up to 3 of these experiences as they study at Northeastern, and they can do them in different disciplines, but they generally stick pretty closely to their area of study. So a lot of opportunities to discuss there, but I'm going to pass it along to Bridget Moore from Tufts College.
Thanks, Brendan. So Tufts today is actually the smallest university represented. So we are a medium-sized research university with about 5,500 undergraduates, and that's spread across the 3 undergraduate schools listed here: the SMFA at Tufts, the School of Engineering, and the School of Arts and Sciences. While Tufts is very proud of being a research university, it is really grounded in the liberal arts. And so you have the same access to high-level research. We're a Carnegie Mellon Institute, but really focused, student-centric, and really centered around that experience as well. And then these words here are just really kind of what we find that unites our students. We find them to be intellectually curious, kind, civically engaged, and globally minded. And next slide, Gloria. Thank you. So just a couple of things that are distinctive about Tufts. Average class size about 22. We have an entire institution on campus that's dedicated to civic life and engagement. Half our students will double major, and 60% will do a combination of major, minor, multiple areas. We also have the experimental college, which really reframes what you would find subject-wise in a traditional academic setting, and allows students to really dive into particular passions and topics. As I mentioned, we're a Tier 1 research university with 60% of our undergraduates doing research. Brendan mentioned this earlier, but research is not just in STEM or hard sciences. It is really spread across all disciplines, and that's definitely true at Tufts as well. And then here's a few examples of some different research opportunities that are funded. So we do have a special program that allows students to do international research with faculty anywhere in the world, as well as on campus in the Boston area and kind of back in your own hometown as well. Next slide. So just a couple notes about who the population is on campus. We are 11% non-US passport holders and about 21% international background. International background means students who maybe like you have a US citizen but are attending school outside the US, have multiple passports. Overall on our campus, there are 110 citizenships represented. And then we haven't talked too much about this because we can only talk about so much, but it is a really vibrant campus community. So at Tufts, we have over 300 plus clubs and organizations, everything from things that are professionally geared to socially minded, to affinity groups, so you can connect with other students identify the way you do. The International Center is one of those that offers additional support through the visa process, through transitioning to campus, all those kinds of things. I think it's important to remember in the US that you don't just get to campus and you're on your own. We definitely are supporting you all the way through in a lot of ways. And at Tufts, the International Center is one of them. And then I'm also just mentioning a couple things about admission as we start to switch into the Q&A. And I put these numbers up here because essentially what's important to remember as we start to get into the QA is that all four of us are up here not just because we're in Boston. There's how many schools in the greater Boston area? We're also here together because we also believe in holistic admission. So the idea that we're not taking one GPA and one test score and that's determining whether you're admitted or not. It's a very holistic process. So there are no hard minimums, things like that, which we'll get to when we answer your questions. I do want to point out that Tufts, given the recent issues around the pandemic, we will be test optional for the next 3 years. We meet 100% of demonstrated need for all students, which is financially based. And then kind of to give you just that sense is last year we had about 23,000 applications for a freshman class, about 1,500. And the way we put that intentional community together is through learning about you through doing things like this and answering your questions, reading your essays, reading your supplements, getting to know you possibly through interviews, all those different things. So as you begin to ask questions and you begin to answer that, keep in mind that it is a really holistic process that is putting a community together to make an impact and for you to be able to learn from each other. So that's important as we start to switch into Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, all four of you, for sharing a lot of great information. And I know that there are quite a few questions varying lots of topics. Since we are, let's just go ahead and start with some updates that each of you might have, considering the current pandemic situation. So there have been some questions, and I'm going to put some slides up here in a minute with some details, but any updates that this region should know about testing, and I know Bridget just mentioned, but also anything that's related to kind of your review process now in this new time.
I could at least start, at least for Boston University. We are taking a similar step in making the SAT or the ACT. We're also going to be test optional, at least for the next calendar year. And that will be something that we will review as we do every year on an annual basis.
I'd like to just mention as well, while Boston College as of today is not test optional and is requiring an SAT or ACT to complete an application for the year ahead, keep in mind that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all of these admission policies are also fluid. And I guess I'm saying this as sensitively, but also directly as I can today. As of today, we're requiring a test, but that could certainly change in the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. And of course, we're going to certainly keep our inquiry pool notified and up to date with any changes. I will also say, there's more to this than just testing as well. The testing policies we're able to speak about and we're able to show when it comes to our websites. But there's also this understanding that students' educational experiences have been disrupted around the world, and not just for the students that tuned into this webinar, but for every student in every school, for the most part, that we'll encounter in the year ahead. So for all admission counselors that are working at all of these US universities, we're going to approach this upcoming year and the years beyond that with the utmost flexibility, sensitivity, and understanding that this particular year and what we are going through as educators and as students is really different. And we need to be understanding that your educational experience may not have looked the same as the class that came before you and the class that came before that. So those sensitivities will absolutely be part of our evaluation moving forward.
Thank you. There is a question about early decision and early action. And I would love for any of you to kind of weigh in about what type of student should be considering ED, and And any other kind of recommendations when you approach that process?
For Boston University, we do offer 2 rounds of early decision, both 1 and 2. The thing to know, so the student who should apply early decision to Boston University, because it is a binding agreement, it is very much for those students who have identified Boston University as really their top choice school, meaning if you are being offered admission, it is of your mindset that you will be accepting that offer of admission and withdrawing all of your other applications. So it doesn't mean that you can't apply to other institutions, because you certainly can. It's just that by agreeing to the binding nature of the early decision agreement, you also agree to withdraw those applications once you receive admission from our institution. There are certainly some statistical benefits. So I say this now with my tongue in the cheek, because while it is a great program designed for those who have BU as their first choice, it is important to note that too, there are some statistical benefits to that. When you think about our applicant pool, we have just over 63,000 applications this year for just over 3,000 new incoming spaces. 45% of those students were enrolled through our early decision program. And of those 63,000 applications, approximately 9,000 of them were early decision. So that leaves a remaining, 54,000 applications from which we can select the remaining 55% of our incoming class. So the point here is that if BU is really your first choice, there are certainly some benefits to going early decision.
I would just add that this year, early decision is going to be a little bit more complicated for a lot of students based on the particular curriculum that you're in. So for some students, depending on when your school went remote, depending on if you only have pass-fail grades, depending on what the grades are from the fall, I think you should really have a sit-down conversation with your counselor about what information you're presenting. So if you're applying to school and you no longer you don't have an SAT to submit, you don't have most grades from junior year, you might not have grades from senior year, maybe early decision 1 isn't in your best interest and early decision 2 is, because you need some more information. That's going to be really different from school to school. And as David really mentioned, all of this is contextual and we're all working through this together. And so for some students who they went remote and the grading continued on, maybe it's going to be a better option for the go ED1. If we're not going to hold it against students if we only have pass-fail grades, but if you really don't have any academic record for almost a year, you might want to apply regular decision in order to be able to have more grades to show to the committee so they have more confidence in kind of the work that you're doing. So essentially, it's going to be a little bit different this year, but really a time to lean into your counselors, have those conversations, and remember that it is a process that everyone's going through, but everyone's situation looks a little different. So really to be thoughtful about that, reach out to individual institutions. And then David, just to kind of uplift what you said earlier, there's a lot of changes right now. There's a lot of things going on. Things are really fluid. The best thing to do is get on the mailing lists for colleges that you're interested in, because policies that haven't changed in 20 years are changing all the time now. If you're on the mailing list, you're gonna get that information. You'll have more opportunities to learn about a specific institution's doing to really know kind of the best, way to approach things for your particular situation.
I just want to add about ED as well, that we are not immune to vanity. We love it when students apply ED. We really like them saying that they really like us. But at the same time, this is a very different year. And I would just really encourage students considering an ED application to any university to really think very long and hard about that application, especially if you have not had a chance to visit the institution, which we know sometimes is a luxury that international applicants don't have anyways, but especially in this year where there are increased restrictions on international travel.
And I will just mention right now that the contact information for each of these admissions officers is up here on these slides, but we will also send some follow-up information with some pertinent links, because in the time that Tuesday Talks has been going on, a group of schools will present for one region, and then the very next time they present, there's a new policy. And so you do want to kind of keep updated as much as you can in this shifting time. I do have quite a few questions about IB specifically, and how to kind of think about that. Obviously, you have reiterated and will continue to reiterate the importance of context, but there are questions about, are there requirements for IB? Are there cutoffs for IB? If you are in an IBD program, does that mean that do you still have to appeal for other tests, like specifically language proficiency tests and whatnot? So if any of you can weigh in on IB specifically.
I can jump in. So in terms of how different schools use the IB as a metric to judge your English proficiency, that's going to vary from school to school. Some universities that you apply to may exempt you from any English proficiency requirement outright if you're doing an IB diploma. Others may consider the specific English course you're taking as well as your results in it. Some may require you to take a TOEFL or IELTS exam regardless. So policies really vary. Unfortunately, you really need to look at individual institutions' websites. And with these types of things, we always encourage students, as boring as it may be, to just create a spreadsheet and start to track that information about institutions that you're interested in. In terms of predicted grades, most universities will share something like a middle 50% range for students who are maybe either going to be competitive for admission, or they may share previous years, admitted ranges for students. I think it's very unlikely that you're going to find any university sharing a direct cutoff for IB requirements. But I think, it's safe to say, as competitive institutions, we're all going to be looking at students that are probably going to be achieving, scores in the ranges of 5s and 6s and 7s in a lot of their classes. That helps give you just a broad benchmark.
Can I say something as well, Gloria?
Sure.
Knowing that there are many of you who are doing the IB probably on this webinar, know that U.S. institutions really respect the International Baccalaureate program as well. And the body of work that you're completing through the IB program, looking at your HL and your SL classes, tying it together, learning across the curriculum and bringing themes together in theory of knowledge. In my opinion, and I think a lot of institutions probably share this opinion, it's wonderful preparation for university study, especially schools that have liberal arts core requirements that are expecting you to not just take courses that are specific to a major or what your future profession may be, but to learn across the curriculum and to bring together likenesses within these topics and have conversations about its greater impact. So I think, or I should say, know that the program that you are doing is absolutely respected. Also know when it comes to predicted scores, total scores as you eventually get them, they don't necessarily guarantee anything. Of course, it's a measure of your achievement within the classroom, but when you're applying to highly selective universities, the vast majority of students that apply to our schools perform well within the classroom, whether that be IB programs or AP classes, or preparing for A-levels or other types of curriculum offerings. Most students perform at a high level. So while we want you to aim for excellence and absolutely work towards achieving at the highest levels you can, cutoffs don't exist because there's a lot of other elements that go into finalizing an admission decision by other than just the predicted total score that you're going to get or what an SAT score or ACT score may be. There's a lot of context with regards to the student's story and who they are within the communities that they work within and exist within as well. So while important, there's probably nothing more important than your academic achievement. It's a piece of a greater process when we read applications and make decisions.
Thank you. Bridget, would you mind talking a little bit more about what test optional means? There are a couple of questions about, when should someone decide to submit a score if they have one?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I just to start off, so we're on the same basis, is cover a little bit of language. So there is now the phrasing of both test optional, test flexible, and test blind. So test flexible means that some kind of testing is required, but you have a lot of options. So that might be a school that takes final IB results, AP results, SAT, ACT, subject test, gives you a variety of choices. Test optional means you can submit testing or not submit testing. It's entirely up to you. If you do not submit testing, you're not at a disadvantage. But if it's something that you want to be part of your application, reflect in your application, you can choose to submit it. And then test blind, some institutions are currently doing this because of the challenges in getting a registration right now. And that means they will not look at testing for any applications. So just good to know the difference between the three. I would say test optional right now is probably the most common if a school is going to be giving different options other than testing required. And it is really hard to tell a blanket statement about whether or not you should submit testing. Because essentially, if you think about it this way, think of your application as being like a puzzle, and there's all these different parts that we're looking at. We're looking at your essays, your recommendations, an interview if you submit one, English proficiency if it's required, the rigor of your transcript. Some schools will consider whether or not you attended something like this, like a webinar or visited campus or did a virtual tour, like all those different things. For some students, having that additional piece in the puzzle of testing helps them. They either had a hard time transitioning into IB, or they struggled their 9th grade year, or whatever it happens to be. Having an additional piece really helps showcase what their potential as a student. For other students, they're just not good testers. It's not something that showcases who they are, and they'd rather not include it and have more of the focus be on the rigor of the classes they're taking and the grades they've achieved in it. What I would say what's important to know is that most places that are testing optional, if you do choose to submit testing, they're going to look at it, whether it helps you or not. So you want to think about it. I would say in general, the best way to kind of decide in a very simple way is to get a sense of what the averages are. You can find them on people's websites and see where you fall. This all being said is that there's regional differences in averages, right? So when you see an average, it's a compilation of all people who submitted that. So schools don't typically say, here's our regional average for India, here's things like that. But if you look at an average, typically students whose first language is not English, we're usually expecting that to be a little bit lower. So if you feel comfortable based on those averages in submitting, then go ahead. If you don't. But this is another thing where it's a conversation with your counselor, with your school counselor, to sit down and say, based on my transcript, based on my rigor, based on my scores, does this make sense? And for some schools, it might make sense to send them, and for other schools, it might not make sense to send them. And what will happen is essentially in your common application, every school has its own page that says, you know, what you're doing for that particular school, and that's where you let a school know, consider my scores, not consider my scores. The vast majority of schools you can send scores to and not have to make a decision if you want to use them or not at the time of application. So you've got some time to figure it out, sit that down and sit on it. For the most part, if you aren't sure and not feeling comfortable, you're probably better off just not submitting those scores. And I think, you know, from what I know from other schools who are test optional, I've worked at a test flexible school, a test required, and a test optional institutions. Typically, schools that are test optional, anywhere from like 30 to 50% of students won't submit scores. If I had to bet how much it'll be this year, I wouldn't be surprised if 70+% of an application pool is not submitting scores this year, given all the complications. So if that helps kind of, it's not a simple answer, but usually the most accurate answers for admission aren't the most simple, but hopefully that helps. But definitely something to think about, all those different pieces.
Thank you. And, you know, with that, there are questions obviously about how to approach kind of your well-roundedness in the time of COVID. And they're specifically, you know, there are pass-fail kind of situations to be taken into consideration, as well as lack of extracurricular activities. There is a question, you know, what if I have really great academics, but I just have no extracurricular curricular activities. How would you encourage the students to think about well-roundedness and how that impacts admissions and your review?
I can tackle that one. I just talked for us. I don't know if I want to do two of them. A couple of things is, one, everyone's in the same boat, right? Everyone's dealing with this. It's not like there's one country or one region that's going to be affected by extracurriculars, things like that. But quite frankly, all the schools on here are quite selective. So even in a normal year, we typically have a really robust application pool of kids who are academically qualified. And it's those other pieces that are setting you aside. I know for our office, we always kind of do an exercise at the end of the year, and typically 80% of our application pool has the rigor, the quantitative pieces of the application. And so what is setting people apart is your supplements, is your essays, is you talking about who you are and why you want to, what you're going to bring to a community, how you fit in with our particular community. All those things are really important. Different schools have different things. For us, the interview is really helpful. So having something like an initial view really helps us get to know the student more past than what we're going to find just on an application. But I think in general, the idea that you have to do so many hours of a place to get in someplace is not true. You know, we're looking to see that you're involved outside the classroom, because part of US experience is being involved outside the classroom. But I've never looked at an applicant and said, oh, they don't have community service, we're not taking them. Oh, they don't play a sport, we're not taking them. Oh, they only did 5 hours instead of 10 hours. It's really not that. I have a colleague who puts it this way, is that we're not looking for well-rounded students, we're looking to make a well-rounded class. So we're looking at students who bring all these different pieces to the table. So in your interviews, in your essays, in your supplements, just tell us who you are, what motivates you, what excites you. That's how we stand out. You stand out in the process. Our jobs, everyone up here would have a lot more free time from November to March if we were just looking at your test score and your GPA, right? But we spend a good chunk of our life, including nights and weekends, reviewing, getting to know you, and getting to all these pieces to build an intentional community. So it's okay if you're, I mean, it's sad. I'm sorry if there's extracurriculars you love that got canceled, that stinks. But you do not have to have 20 hours of activities to tell me why you get excited about literature, why you're really into TikTok. Probably don't talk about that one, but whatever that gets you excited, gets you going, and you have fun talking about and spending time with friends doing, and you're excited to do again. You can talk about all of those things, even if you can't currently do them.
I would say though that TikTok has become a quarantine savior. Having just gotten into it in the last month, it's kind of nice, one of those little nice distractions. But I agree, Bridget, that's wonderful advice. You may want to steer clear of having that be the focus of your essay, for example.
I will say I had one student write an essay about trying to put together her Twitter bio and how hard it was to distill herself down to the word limit. And it was actually really, really well done. But then I had another student write a very bad essay about finding out via Snapchat she didn't get invited to a party. So you take care of those topics.
Speaking of essays, do all of you have supplements in your application, and do those questions change each year? I'm seeing nods.
Yeah, I was just going to say our questions change, but we run them through a cycle. So our questions this year are the same as last year, but if there's any students that will be applying in 2 years, the questions will be different at that point. So we cycle them through so we can compare them. We can compare the data, the responses, and the decisions from year to year.
Great. I just want to touch real briefly on finances, as there have been a few questions about tuition and scholarship and financial aid. So if any of you want to kind of briefly cover how to get that information, maybe.
Sure, I can start. So at Northeastern, we meet full demonstrated need for all US citizens and permanent residents. If you don't hold US citizenship or permanent residency, as with US citizens and permanent residents, you'll automatically be considered for academic merit scholarships. These are competitive, but they range in value from $10,000 to about $30,000 per academic year. So important to note that if you don't hold U.S. citizenship or permanent residency, we don't have any full tuition scholarship available for students at present.
If I can sort of add to that, very similar in nature in that if you are a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, we offer need-based as well as merit-based. But the great thing is that merit-based opportunities are available to all applicants. There are action steps one must need to take, and that's not uncommon at a lot of schools. So again, make sure you're paying attention to the school deadlines that they might indicate. There's an admissions deadline often, always, but there might also be financial aid, need, or merit-based deadlines as well. But students do have the option to apply for roughly half tuition as well as full tuition merit-based scholarships at BU by submitting their application by the December 1 deadline. So proud to say that there are those additional options available.
Just going down the line, Boston College, in a similar yet slightly different way, we're need blind in the way we read applications and make admission decisions with regards to our U.S. citizens and permanent residents, and we meet full demonstrated need for that group. However, those who are non-U.S. citizens are required to pay for the full cost of attendance. That said, we do have one merit scholarship program, the Gabelli Scholarship. It's full tuition for 4 years. It's extremely competitive, and we offer it to 15 students in every incoming class of about 2,300. So with that, it's extremely competitive, but all students who submit an application by the November 1st priority deadline are considered for it. And it doesn't mean you have to commit through ED. Most of those students are regular decision candidates, but they apply by November 1st for consideration for the Gabelli program.
And then at Tufts, we have the same policy for everyone, regardless of citizenship. So we need 100% demonstrated need for all students. It is need-based financial aid only, so we don't do merit aid. So essentially, if you are admitted, we meet your full cost of attendance that's calculated. And essentially, the way financial aid works for U.S. citizens at most places as well, if they meet full demonstrated need, you fill out the paperwork tells us how much your family can contribute. We subtract that from the cost of attendance, and that is your family contribution that's being covered through need-based aid. So that's kind of the lingo that people are using for that. It's a couple phrases that are just good to know when it comes to financial aid is meets full need, gapping, that means the school can't fully cover that difference. So that's a good thing to know. If you are a U.S. citizen, there are a lot of online calculators on most websites they're required now. So you can actually take your information and pop it into those calculators and get a sense of what need-based aid you get. I'll say that doesn't exist the same way for merit aid, or not. It doesn't always work in most cases for non-U.S. citizens because of taxes and things that the algorithms are based off of. But there are some ways to get information. If you are a U.S. citizen, you're typically filling out the FAFSA and the profile. That's pretty common at all private universities. If you are a non-U.S. citizen, you might have some different forms, but typically you might be filling out the profile as well, or an international financial aid application, so ISFA. So those are probably the forms you're more likely to find. I will say we do meet 100% demonstrated need for non-U.S. citizens. There's only about 80 or so colleges and universities in the U.S. that do that, so it's pretty rare. In addition, because of how rare it is incredibly competitive. So overall admission to Tufts is competitive, but if you are applying for financial aid, it's an even more competitive process.
Thank you. And real briefly, as we're wrapping up here, there are some questions about U.S. citizens versus international. Like if you are a U.S. passport holder, but you're living abroad, do you count as an international student or as a U.S. student?
Yeah, so there's two differences. One is financial aid based and one's application based. So the schools can mention each. From a financial aid perspective, if you have a U.S. passport or a green card holder, doesn't matter where you live, you're eligible for federal aid. And then if people want to talk about from an application standpoint.
Yeah, and at least for us, if you have a U.S. citizenship or permanent residency status, you are but you're living in, say, Australia, you are in fact part of our domestic applicant pool because you do qualify. That's how we sort of, separate the two. So for us, the 24% international representation in our incoming pool is literally all those with a non-US citizenship or permanent residency status. So that's how we will distinguish from the admissions perspective.
At Northeastern, in terms of the admissions piece, there's really no distinction this year with our test optional policy.
Wonderful. Well, we are at the hour, and it's gone by, and there are questions that were not addressed, and so we will be sending more information to you so that you can reach out, and go to the relevant links of these institutions. Also, their email addresses are right here, and they would love to hear from you. If there are other school-specific, institution-specific questions that you have. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to give all the admissions officers one more chance to give a last kind of final comment.
I would say just stay strong, everyone. As Bridget echoed earlier, we're all in this together. We're all going through very similar issues, no matter where we are in the world. We as admissions professionals are not exempt from that as well. So in looking ahead, really just try to keep the true essence of what it is you want in an institution and where you want to be in the future. Keep that at the forefront of your mind as you conduct your search, and just know that colleagues such as myself and Bridget and Brendan and David, we are here to really help you through that search process.
I'd add that this kind of moment globally doesn't have to define your application to university if you don't want it to. You're welcome to write about it in your essay if you feel like it's going to tell us something important about who you are, but it's also not required, and that's really, I think, the beauty of the holistic admissions process.
Bridget?
There's a lot going on in the world right now. Things are pretty crazy. It can be very intense. Make sure you're taking some time for just yourself. I know the college process is a whole nother level of stress and all those things on top of it. And for any counselors, same thing. Do a puzzle, whatever. Bullet journaling is what gets me through. So just make sure that with everything going on, that you're taking time to decompress, have time to yourself, in order to just take care of yourself.
And we love our international students. We love interacting with you. We love welcoming you to campus. We love building and nurturing relationships with you over the course of your time on our campus. And we also want you to know how valuable you are to our greater university communities as well, bringing your global perspective, whether you are a non-US student or a US student that's just been studying outside of the US during your time in high school. We appreciate you. We appreciate your stories, your perspective. We can't wait to hear more from you and read your essays and get to know you more over the course of this process moving forward. And from an admissions standpoint, again, flexibility, understanding, and sensitivity. That is what we were all about. I'd like to say every year, but even more so this year and moving forward.
Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you again for spending your afternoon and evening with us. It's such a great opportunity for us to connect in a time of uncertainty. And we look forward to continuing these conversations. So please tune in next Tuesday. We'll have another talk. In the meantime, we will keep in touch with you. Make sure you can email me too if you feel like your questions weren't answered, and I'll try to make sure to relay those for you. Once again, thank you, David, Brendan, Bridget, Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning, and good luck, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.
Thank you, Gloria.
Good luck. Be well.